Brillan las tinieblas y nadie lo puede apagar. Y este amor que lo llena todo es desde el principio y hasta el fin. Me amaste primero, viniste por mí, me amaste primero, viniste por mí. Y este amor brilla en las tinieblas y nadie lo puede apagar. Y este amor que lo llena todo es desde el principio y hasta el fin. Y este amor brilla en las tinieblas y nadie lo puede apagar. Y este amor que lo llena todo es desde el principio y hasta el fin. Existo para ti, para tu amor. No existo para nada más, Dios, para nada más. Existo para ti, para tu amor. No existo para nada más. Existo para ti, para tu amor. No existo para nada más, Dios, para nada más. Existo para ti, para tu amor. No existo para nada más. Y este amor brilla en las tinieblas y nadie lo puede apagar. Y este amor que lo llena todo es desde el principio y hasta el fin.
Bienvenidos a nuestra segunda jornada de la Academia Wilberforce en Español, en este segundo seminario introductorio 2021. Sé bienvenido a la hora en que estés conectado, en el momento en que estés ya sentado y disponiéndote para estar con nosotros. Este es un tiempo precioso y Dios está detrás de cada detalle. A pesar de cualquier circunstancia, Dios está atrás. Y damos gracias al Señor porque estás allí, frente a frente o escuchando solamente en el lugar donde Dios te tenga a la hora que sea, pero dispuesto, abierto el corazón. Y saben, como dice la Constitución colombiana en su preámbulo, invocando la protección de Dios. Esa protección de Dios invocamos en esta mañana y sabemos que Él está con nosotros. Bueno, aquí es de mañana, pero en el momento que estés, cuando estés aquí mirando esta serie, en presencia de Dios y de Cristo Jesús, quien un día juzgará a los vivos y a los muertos, cuando venga para establecer su reino, te pido encarecidamente, predica la palabra de Dios, mantente preparado. Sea o no el tiempo oportuno, corrige, reprende y anima a tu gente con paciencia y con buena enseñanza. Llegará el tiempo en que la gente no escuchará más la sólida y sana enseñanza, seguirán sus propios deseos y buscarán maestros que les digan lo que sus oídos se mueren por oír. Rechazarán la verdad e irán tras los mitos. Pero tú debes mantener la mente clara en toda situación. No tengas miedo de sufrir por el Señor. Ocúpate en decirles a otros la buena noticia y lleva a cabo todo el ministerio que Dios te dio. En 2 de Timoteo 4, 1, 5. Hablábamos ayer que esta pequeña luz que tenemos, simbólicamente como la canción de los niños, esta pequeña luz la vamos a dejar brillar. Pero es que la pequeña luz, como nos decía ayer la terapeuta Carmen Gallego, la pequeña luz en las tinieblas es lo más codiciado, alumbra perfecto. Esa pequeña luz que cada uno de nosotros tiene y que estamos encendiendo cada vez más, que sea lo que nos acompañe. También entendía yo personalmente anoche, como cuando el doctor Booth hablaba acerca de este es su llamado, este es su ministerio. Él con la palabra nos abre luz, pero no todos estamos con ese llamado específico como este caballero. Otros están llamados a hacer lobby en un congreso, otros están llamados a escribir un documento, otros están llamados a llamar, a convocar para orar y para orar. Otros están llamados para desde un púlpito enseñar a las juventudes y enseñar a las congregaciones. Otros están llamados a estudiar en lo secreto, cada uno de acuerdo a su don. Y hoy sigue este banquete precioso y nadie mejor para iniciar nuestra primera sesión del segundo día de la Wilberforce Academy en español que la doctora Luz Marina Castrillón, directora académica del Colegio de Abogados de Antioquia, es miembro del equipo directivo de Christian Concert Colombia y por supuesto la directora del Centro Legal. Desde Medellín, Colombia, bienvenida doctora Luz Marina.
Bueno, muy buenos días y tardes y noches para todos. Muchas gracias, Edgar, por tu presentación. Para mí es un honor estar en este día compartiendo con ustedes la presentación de la ponencia de la doctora Andrea Williams. Ella ha nombrado su enseñanza el Estado de la Nación y es casi la continuidad de la enseñanza que tuvimos en la noche anterior del doctor Joe Booth respecto del sistema nacional y la forma como Dios viene interesándose en cada área de nuestra vida y en cada lugar de influencia. Es así entonces que la doctora de una manera muy sencilla nos cuenta que Jesús está en todo y en todos los lugares. Está en la iglesia, está en las universidades, está en los colegios, está en los hospitales y está en los tribunales. En este día yo quiero orar antes de iniciar este tiempo y escuchar la enseñanza de la doctora Andrea para que sea el Espíritu Santo el que obre de manera poderosa, no solo en esta enseñanza, sino en las que vienen de la academia. Y estamos absolutamente convencidos de que Dios nos entregará las estrategias necesarias para este tiempo. Tenemos que ser indiscutiblemente líderes entendidos en los tiempos. Tenemos que tener absoluta claridad que el Espíritu de Dios está sobre nosotros y que nos dará la sabiduría suficiente para poder enfrentar momentos como estos tan difíciles de nuestro país. Desde el Centro Legal, entonces, elevamos una oración en esta mañana, en esta tarde, desde nuestro corazón para que sea el Espíritu Santo el que venga en esta mañana, en esta tarde y en este día y que derrame de su sabiduría sobre nosotros. Padre, te damos muchas gracias por este tiempo. Gracias, Señor, por que tú estás aquí con nosotros. Gracias porque nos das un corazón sencillo, enseñable, para que todo lo que tú tienes para nosotros en la academia a través de los conferencistas, a través de tu palabra, a través de la impartición de cada uno de los que están enfrente de las pantallas, detrás en la organización, Señor, seamos todos empoderados con tu palabra, que esas enseñanzas queden escritas en nuestros corazones y que hagan la diferencia en este tiempo. Bueno, como les dije, para mí es un honor presentar a la doctora Andrea Williams. Ella hoy nos va a disertar sobre el tema el Estado de la Nación. Indiscutiblemente, de una manera muy sabia, ella nos va a compartir parte de su vida profesional. La doctora Andrea es la abogada, es fundadora de Christian Concert, se titularizó en 1988 y a partir de ese momento, dice ella en su enseñanza que fueron 3 elementos que le acompañaron en su vida profesional. Ella dice que no solo amaba a Jesús desde los 4 años cuando sus padres la trajeron a Inglaterra, sino que empezó un caminar donde a los 8 años ella le pedía de rodillas a Dios que le permitiera ser abogada. Y así fue. Entonces ella nos cuenta que no sabe en qué momento el Señor la bendice, se hace abogada, pero empezó a conocerse como una abogada cristiana. Dice que llegó con 3 elementos a fundar a Christian Concert Inglaterra. Dice que con un amor profundo en su corazón, con la Biblia en su cabeza y con las leyes en su conocimiento. Entonces nos comparte en medio de su enseñanza la palabra de Esther, hablando de la forma en que Esther nos entrega 3 elementos fundamentales para este tiempo. El primero es la valentía, el segundo es la sabiduría y el tercero es el vestimiento de las túnicas reales. Y realmente necesitamos esos 3 elementos. Y en este día, nosotros desde el Centro Legal hacemos una convocatoria abierta para ayuno y oración el día de hoy, 5, 6 y 7 de noviembre, para que el Señor nos dé las estrategias suficientes y podamos pronunciarnos sobre ese decreto del gobierno que acabó de romper indiscutiblemente con los derechos humanos. Es una violación latente a los derechos humanos sin precedente. Si nosotros guardamos silencio en este tiempo, si nosotros no nos pronunciamos, si no somos oposición, el gobierno va a tomar más espacio, no solo en nuestras vidas, sino en todas las áreas de ella. Entonces, esta convocatoria pública es para ayuno y oración. Y el día 8, el Centro Legal abrirá un chat, un Zoom, 24 horas hasta el día siguiente para recibir de ustedes los apoyos jurídicos, los elementos jurídicos, las estrategias que Dios va a bajar para que nosotros podamos pronunciarnos al respecto. Esta enseñanza de la doctora Andrea Williams definitivamente es como si Dios la trajera para este momento, porque la enseñanza está alrededor de la palabra de Dios. Cuando Esther, en medio de ese decreto macabro para exterminar su pueblo, llena de valor, se pone las vestiduras reales sin ser llamada a palacio, irrumpe con los protocolos reales, se presenta ante el rey con valor, con sabiduría, con esas vestiduras y haya gracia y favor y es decretado o es exterminado el decreto que se había pronunciado en contra de su pueblo. Eso es lo que estamos pidiendo esta mañana y esa es la enseñanza que nos trae la doctora en este día. Estado de la nación. ¿Quién sabe si para este tiempo hemos nacido? Nosotros necesitamos ser empoderados, abogados esforzados, valientes, sin temor, para hablar en este tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Christian Concern is passionate about seeing the love, justice, truth, freedom and hope of Jesus at the heart of society. We know that Jesus is Lord of all. That doesn't just mean in our personal lives, but in our churches, in the courts, on the television, and in Parliament.
So we seek justice, defending Christian freedoms in the legal system and campaigning for just, righteous laws.
We speak truth, taking every opportunity to champion the goodness of God's pattern for our lives, our families, and our society on television, radio, online, and in the newspapers.
And we bring hope, helping the world to see how much better things can be when we live in line with God's beautiful design for our lives.
Well, I pray that the church would recognize what they have in Christian concern.
Almost 4 years now, I've been fighting to clear my name, and I'm really excited today that the judges finally ruled in my favor.
I would never forget when I came into the office and there were 5 people there and they were looking at my notes and thought, they've taken this a little bit seriously. That was the first ray of hope I had.
Hello everyone, it's really wonderful to be with you at this CRC Bible School. I absolutely love the vision of the Christian Revival Church that set out one church in many locations. The vision is to win, the mandate is to win the lost at any cost. You know this. The vision is to build one church in many locations, nationally and internationally. The CRC mission is to mend the nets. The catch will be great. And when we talk about the state of the nation in this Bible school today, I want to say, let's not be disturbed by the state of the nation, but as Christians and as people who are here studying in order to understand the times, let's look to understand the culture and to mend the nets that are broken in the culture in order to catch the culture for Jesus Christ. And what are we doing here? Well, we are training. We're training in order to release both you and me into ministry, to care and to disciple individuals. Yes, we care for each one. We want to reach each one. But we care also for families collectively, for communities collectively, for nations. We want to disciple not just individuals, but families and schools and hospitals and local government and national government. We want to speak internationally of the good news of Jesus Christ in a Western world that has lost the lordship of Jesus Christ, but somehow thinks that they know about Christianity when actually Christianity has been lost. We need to really understand the culture. We need to understand where we are, not be too downhearted, because, in fact, I say not to be too downhearted. You're at this Bible school because you're here to catch the culture, to change the culture. So the Lord has put an assignment in your heart for his kingdom purposes at this time. And knowing King Jesus in this time is releasing and freeing and wonderful. And I believe the only answer for a culture that is lost. Just a little bit about me. I know we're in a Bible school, but I think it's perhaps good to anchor who I am so that you know who brings you this story of the state of the nation of the United Kingdom. And you can pretty much extend it out to much of the developed world across the globe, because we are certainly in a globalized world at this time. But a little bit about me. I'm a barrister. I was qualified in 1988. But when did it all start? Well, it started way back when, in 1965, the year I was born, to an Italian immigrant here into the United Kingdom, and a very young mum. She was just 17, just turned 18 when she had me, and they were starting life together, this very young couple with a tiny baby. My father was a waiter. He saved all his tips. I was born in a little caravan. They built their first house. And a local church came and picked up all the children on the local estate where I was living, where Dad had built his house. And I was one of the little children, aged 4, that was picked up by the church bus. And I was then taken to Eastern Methodist Church, and there Mrs. Hicks told me all about Jesus. I was 4 years of age. I fell in love with Jesus there and then, aged 4. And indeed, I cannot remember a moment when I have not loved Jesus. So what do I want to say to you that are studying here in terms of capturing the culture? Well, how you capture the heart of a 4-year-old is very, very important. I was captured by Christ because a church reached out to the local community and found Andrea Minichiello, Aldina Minichiello, my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, and then my brother, Mark Minichiello. And as a result of the 3 children coming to know Jesus, my parents then came to know Jesus. They were not Christians when they put me on that bus. Age 7, another Sunday school teacher told me that the best present I could ever have was a Bible and to read my Bible every day. And I took that Sunday school teacher at her word. And I can say that almost every day from that day to this, I have read my Bible. Aged 8 or 9, I was watching television at home with my mum. I was sick from school with chickenpox. And I said, there was a program called Crown Court, one of those, the very first legal program on the television. I was unwell, but I said to my mum, you know, it was very old fashioned. We are talking early 70s, wigs and gowns. I've got my wig and gown. I should have brought it with me to wear. Wig and gown. And I said to my mum, when I grow up, I'm going to be a barrister and I'm never going to change my mind. And that night, that little girl prayed at the bottom of the ladder on the bunk beds. And I said my usual prayer, God bless Mum, God bless Dad, God bless Sam the cat, God bless Nanny, God bless Grandad, Amen. And dear Lord Jesus, if it is your will, please may I pass the 11 plus so that I can go to the grammar school, so that I can become a barrister. And I prayed that prayer every single night until the Lord granted me the desire of my heart. And I was one of 2 children that passed the 11 plus. And I went across from Portland in Dorset, so a little tiny place on the south coast of England. And I went across from this peninsula to the mainland, to Weymouth, to go to school. And then through my school years, from age 11 to 18, I was very determined to do as well as I could, because I figured that the only way that a little girl like me had any chance of going to university, of becoming a barrister, was if I studied very hard. Aged 14, I was at a youth conference and I said, Lord Jesus, I'm surrendered. I'll go wherever you have me go. I'll do whatever you'll have me do. But please, can I still be a barrister? And I went on and I studied law and Italian. Then I qualified as a barrister. I practiced criminal and family law for 8 years, having been called to the bar in 1988. So we're now here in the mid-80s to 90s. And I began to see that our Christian laws founded in common law means a common law. And in Great Britain, in the UK unwritten constitution, the common law was understood as biblical law. There were foundational tenets that were rooted in the Bible, rooted in the 10 Commandments. But beginning to vie in the legal space was a human rights proposition, and then equality propositions, which began to say there are many competing truths in the law. So we began to navigate competing truths, not a common law, not a supreme law. And as we began to compete in the square, I began to see how the foundations of our law were moving away from the light and the life-giving law of the biblical law. And it was during that time that Christians began to come to me. I'd become known as a Christian lawyer and asked me for help because Christians were getting into trouble just for being Christian. So when a student union at a university wanted to elect Christians to its governing body and were told they had to open it up to Christians and non-Christians, to anyone, they came to me. That was one of my early cases. When I began to see the law, if you told me when I was studying in the 1980s, So it's not so long ago, but if you had said to me that people would get into trouble in this country for offering prayer, street preachers would be arrested. If you had said to me that marriage would be redefined to include 2 men or 2 women, if you had said to me that you could change your sex and that would be recognized in law, I would have said that couldn't possibly happen. The culture has so shifted, and I think for those that are younger and for it, it's hard to imagine that this was not in our imagination. It would not have been in the imagination when I was born in the 1960s. It would not have been in our imagination in legal terms in the 1980s. The culture has flipped. And that's why, with hearts full of love and with heads steeped in the Bible and in knowledge, we need to understand the times in order to seek the lost and win the lost at any cost, to mend the nets, to mend the broken nets of culture so that the catch will be great. You see, the lost catch is struggling in a culture that it doesn't understand itself, and that is chaotic, in a culture that's chaotic, in a culture that hurts. And that's why our job at this Bible school is to understand how indeed, through careful study and then action, we can go and mend the nets. And so as I begin this talk today, I'd like to take us to Esther 4. And these passages will be familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. Let me just read from Esther 4. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do you think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape? For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? In Esther 5, this is Esther's request to the king. On the 3rd day, bearing in mind no one was to come to the king, but she had been challenged. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. Christians, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come from another place, or perhaps no relief in our times. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on the royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. He held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached. He said, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom will be given to you." You see, she hadn't been invited, but was surprised when she actually approached the king. She put on the royal robes. Today, we have the clothes of Christ. We are garmented with the royal robes of King Jesus. And we need to have the courage, even when we think we're uninvited, to walk into whatever sphere of culture we are in with the royal robes of Christ. And you know what? They may say to us, "What is your request? What do you have to say?" They may kick us out. But if we don't step in with courage, you see, for Queen Esther, she had to have the courage to put on the robes. When we step in to the cracked culture, do we have courage in the cracked culture to put on the creation robes, to put on the robes of Christ Jesus? What are we wearing? In Esther 7, it says, Queen Esther answered, "If I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold as male and female slaves. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing you." Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. Do you see that she goes out and says to the king, "For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated"? Are we living in a culture where people are being killed and annihilated? Maybe in their spirit, maybe even in their body, maybe even in their soul. What is this culture doing? It's distressed. Esther again pleaded with the king, Esther 8. Falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and he regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews of all the king's provinces. For how can I bear disaster? How can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" Christians, how can we bear to see disaster fall on our communities, on our nations, fall on our children? How can I bear to see, how can we bear to see the destruction of the culture of family, the culture of life, the culture of truth? How can we bear to see that destruction? We are called to put on our robes, our royal robes, the robes of King Jesus. And you here at CRC Bible Study, Bible School, you are here learning how to put on the robes. You've got the robes, but how do I wear them today when I step into the cracked culture? And what is this cracked culture? Well, it's a confused and a divided world, a world of irreconcilable worldviews. Of course, that's not all. We know that from the beginning of time. There are two worldviews. You're either with King Jesus, you're either with the Lord and creator of the universe, our Father God. And if you're not with him, then the devil prowls. We are either oriented towards King Jesus and we wear the robes. If not, the devil takes the territory. Of course, people don't necessarily understand that, but it's two worlds and they're irreconcilable. And there's a sense in which, I'm not going to be simplistic about this, but we have a world, and certainly a developed world, that is entirely divided almost over every issue. In recent years here in the UK, we've had Brexit, we've had coronavirus. How are we going to deal with these things? Donald Trump, Black Lives Matter, race, gender, sexuality. In every space, people are talking past one another, not connecting. We live in silos. We live in ghettos. We live in segregated communities. We fear. There's a culture of fear. If I say this, will I be viewed as phobic? If I say this, will that be hate speech? What if I express this opinion? Will they speak less of me? Well, the courage and the wisdom of Queen Esther is required. The royal robes are required, even if we are not invited, even if we should not approach because the king said, or we think we should not approach. then when our people and our culture is being annihilated, the command is to go and mend the net. The command is to catch. The command is to meet the needs of the culture. In 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14, God made this promise to Solomon 3,000 years ago. And there are specific instructions to God's people who wear the robes. If my people, this says, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now, let me say on this verse is well known. And I think it's like we don't hear one part of it as the church. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will heal their land. There's something missing there. He says, and turn from their wicked ways. Is he saying that to the culture outside? Is God saying, culture, parliament, turn from your wicked ways? No. He's saying you with the royal robes. You with the royal robes. You, the church of Jesus Christ, turn from your wicked ways. Now, what does that mean? It means we haven't put them on well. It means we haven't dared to confront the things that harm people. We've not dared to confront sin, catastrophe, a culture that aches, a culture that's broken, a culture that's rejected Jesus Christ, a culture that's rejected his pattern for humanity. He says, turn from your wicked ways. It says, you've allowed the world, the other worldview, to enter your church, the way you operate. You've allowed them to dictate your culture. Turn from your wicked ways. And what is the solution? Well, it, according to 2 Chronicles 7, can only be a spiritual one. And our hearts must be changed by God. And only he can change them. But judgment starts with the family of God. In Mark 8, as Jesus is walking to the cross, and Peter says, don't go there, don't go there. It's hard to imagine this in many ways. Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God. If anyone is ashamed of me, but listen, it's not just him, it's and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, then I will be ashamed of them when he comes in the Father's glory with the holy angels. You know, we can sometimes in this culture get away with being Jesus friendly. You know, Jesus eat, sleep, repeat on a mug. We can get away with that maybe. But actually getting away with the commands of Jesus Christ in an adulterous and sinful generation, getting away with his words when they conflict with the culture is not so easy. And this is where compassionately, but courageously, we need to have the tools, and that's what you'll hear at the Bible school to do. So where have we, as God's people, been ashamed of Jesus and his words? Where have we, where is it that we need to turn from our wicked ways? Well, I'm going to give you a window from I'm the visual aid from the 1960s. It's in my lifetime. I'm coming up for 56 years of age. So I'm going to say this has happened in my lifetime. Maybe just a little bit before it started. But essentially, this complete cultural turnaround has happened in this time. In Genesis 1, in the United Kingdom. So where have we been ashamed of Jesus and his words? Genesis 1, God made all things. And he made male and female. In the image of God, he made them. We've been ashamed of Jesus being uniquely the way, the truth, and the life. Not one truth amongst many. You know, he is king of the United Kingdom. He is King Jesus. When we tolerate a pluralistic society as if all the truths are equal, but do not assert the lordship and the life and the beauty and the freedom and the kindness that comes from laws and a nation rooted in Christ Jesus, when we fail to assert that, then we end up in the cultural chaos that we are in. So his lordship, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And when we hand it all over, when we go our own way, we end up in Romans 1. What does it say in Romans 1? It says, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts. So this is what happens when people abandon God and they exchange the truth about God for a lie. They worship and serve created things rather than the Creator. They exchange unnatural relations one with another, men with men and women with women. They're handed over to shameful lusts. So Romans 1 says we exchange the truth for a lie. We worship and serve the lie. What do we worship? What's an idol in this nation? Well, one of the biggest idols, of course, is our bodies, sex, supposed freedom. We practice that. We approve this practice. We approve so-called sexual freedom. And we end up with a lot of people hurting and broken and guilty. But Romans 1 says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. I think as well, and I'm going to get to the meat of this soon, this is a long introduction, but that I want you to know, everyone that's sitting there listening to this, never forget that there is power in the gospel. And it's that power that brings salvation. And when we proclaim it, that power changes lives and will change culture. First to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel is what? This is an important line. It's the righteousness of God. For the gospel is the righteousness of God. What is the righteousness? It's how now to live. It's how to be right. It's how to be moral. It's how to be true. It's a moral revolution. I want to reclaim morality. I don't want that to sound old-fashioned and miserable. I want to claim morality. Why? Because it's freeing and beautiful and true and fantastic and wonderful. And this cracked culture is crying out for a moral revolution. This cracked culture is crying out for boundaries that say, you are made in the image of God. You are precious. You are beautiful. How you act, how you use your body is for a creation ordinance purpose. One man, one woman joined in union, sexual union for life, to have children within that union. This is how a nation thrives. And in Christ Jesus, Colossians 1, everything holds together. He's the firstborn over all creation. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in Germany, when the Nazis were sending the Jews to the concentration camps and the church became complicit in this, there were Reich churches. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this: there are thus three possibilities for action that the church can take vis-a-vis the state. 1, question the state as to the legitimate state character of its actions. That is, make the state responsible for what it does. So there we are, everyone. The first thing a church must do is question the state's actions. The second is service to the victims of the state's action. The church has an unconditional obligation towards the victims of any societal order, even if they do not belong to the Christian community. I think we're pretty good at this. I think we're pretty good at being street pastors and pretty good at being there for the homeless and giving food and being there for drug addicts and I think we're good at being the social services. And we need to Hear me right, we need to keep on doing that. But very often, we allow ourselves to be the social services without the righteousness of God, without the transforming power. We think that if we keep on being a social service for long enough, people will realize that just by our love, there is something in this Jesus. Well, no, they need to be told about the moral revolution, the gospel, the righteousness of God. Thirdly, let me just read this. These are both ways in which the church in its freedom conducts itself in the interest of a free state. In times when the laws are changing, the church may under no circumstances neglect either of these duties. But the third possibility is not just to bind up the wounds of the victims of the cracked culture beneath the wheel of the state, but it's to seize the wheel itself. So as Christians, seize the wheel, put on your robes. Believe that you can change the culture. The role of the church is to be the prophet and the priest to the nation. If I profess, said Martin Luther, with the loudest voice and clearest exposition, every portion of the word of God, except precisely that little point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing him. Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved, and to be steady on all the battlefronts besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point. So where has the battlefront been? When the Queen came to the throne in 1953, she was presented with a Bible by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Will you, Queen Elizabeth, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel? She's presented with the Bible. Our gracious Queen, to keep your majesty ever mindful of the law of God. Here is wisdom. This is the royal law. These are the lively oracles of God. This is the unwritten constitution in the United Kingdom. But where has the culture gone since 1952? So 10 years before I was born. It was during that period that the contraceptive pill came in, which had a massive impact on how we behaved sexually. It's one of the things that happened. In 1952, abortions were illegal. Today, you're able to abort babies up to 24 weeks and up to birth for disability. In 1952, 4.8% of babies were born outside of marriage in the United Kingdom. Today, it's 46%. When the Queen came to the throne, there were 350,000 marriages with a population of 50 million. Today, with 16 million more people in the United Kingdom, there are 240,000 marriages. In 1952, 34,000 divorces per year. Today, 120,000 divorces per year. Let's look at one of the hard lines. God made. God created and knit you together in your mother's womb. Abortion became legal. In fact, it's still illegal unless, strictly is the law, unless the mum's life is at risk or the risk of physical or mental problems are greater if she continues with the pregnancy. But let's look at the statistics around this. So abortion, when the law came in 1967, was meant to be very rare. But let's look at the government statistics. In 1967, in England, Scotland and Wales, there were 21,000 abortions. By the year 1970, there were 90,000 abortions per year. Now, every year in England, Scotland and Wales, there are around 300,000 abortions every year. 9.5 million abortions have taken place since the passing of the Act in 1967. How many is 9.5 million? Well, it is 15% of the entire population of the United Kingdom. It is 5 times the UK casualties in both world wars. It is more than the combined populations of Birmingham, Bradford, Bristol, Cambridge, Cardiff, Chester, Derby, Edinburgh, Leeds, Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Northampton, Nottingham, Oxford, Sheffield, and Southampton. Imagine all of those cities being wiped out today. Imagine all those lives that God knows. Imagine a culture that says, here's a pill, you can have sex when you want it, no strings attached, but somehow we still get pregnant without commitment. We say a culture that says, it's okay, because if you get pregnant, there's the possibility of abortion. And when you're initially pregnant, well, it's not really a life anyway, is it? And then the woman says, well, we're taught it's not really a life anyway. And then what you have is the dispensing of life that God made. And we have 9.5 million missing citizens. That's 600 babies every day. More than 3,000 babies aborted after 20 weeks each year in this country, which is when babies would be viable. And 98% of abortions are technically illegal. From the 2nd of March of last year to the 27th of March this year, deaths by COVID were 127,480. Now, we've stopped this nation, we've locked ourselves down, we've stopped the economy, we've not been able to travel in order to save lives because there's been a terrible virus. We've locked ourselves down. 127,480 COVID deaths. During the same period in the United Kingdom, when we've been locked down, there have been 241,767 abortions. Does the culture say anything? Does the culture view the average age of death as at time of recording is for COVID is 81.3, 81 years of age, 0.3. The average age of death by abortion is less than 10 weeks in the womb. So the 241,767 unborn babies don't get to live their first breath, let alone 81 years, 0.6. Because the culture says, not the right time, inconvenient, not really a life. Not one word is spoken about it. The church, what does the church say about it? Do we speak of it? Well, here's this. Ladies and gentlemen of the CRC Bible School, how about being a church that is the rescue centre for women in unplanned pregnancies? How about viewing the mending of the nets as saying, we're the hospital, we're here. We've got a scanning machine. We've got a whole load of baby equipment. We'll help you find a house. We'll walk you through this. We've got, if you really can't manage the baby, we'll find a way to adopt this baby, care for this baby, give this baby life. Come and be part of our family. Come and be part of the church. Come and know Jesus Christ. You know with Jesus everything is possible. You know that Jesus provides. You know that God provides. He's a father. How about that as a church? How about rather than the abortion centres being the place that everyone goes to in a crisis pregnancy, how about the church being the place? How about we've got notices outside our doors? How about that being one way to mend the culture? Across the globe, stats for 2018 show that 1.7 million died of AIDS, 5 million of cancer, 8.2 million 8.2 million of cancer, 5 million of smoking, and of abortion, 41.9 million. 41.9 million. It's a global issue, not just a UK issue. But you know what? We can do it. One church in many locations. The church can rescue this situation because we've got the network. We can save the one. We can save the one that's in our community. And we've got to believe that we can save the one and create a culture for life. The thing that happens when you begin to divorce, when you say that life is no longer precious, is that we then move into a situation, or that the embryo is something that is not worthy of absolute protection, is you then move into a situation where fertility treatments begin to emerge. In 1978, we have the first possibility of creating life in a test tube. That's we have the first test tube baby. We then move to 1990, where for the first time we create embryos with the express purpose of experimenting upon them and then destroying them. So and then in 2002, we moved to creating cloned human embryos. What's cloning? It's man making man in the image of man. So you go from taking a life in 1967, making a life in 1978, to faking a life in 2004. And then in 2008, we have the creation of animal-human hybrid embryos. That's the mixing of cow's eggs with human sperm. And recently, you will have heard of the research that's being done on monkey and human embryos that are being grown in laboratories. That is defacing the human race. When you do not take as a first creation ordinance the uniqueness of being human, made in God's image, and carry with that the utmost sanctity, when you think that you can discard it when it's inconvenient, when you think that you can play around with it, then you deface the human race and you deface the face of God. What becomes possible? Well, all kinds of things become possible. Emerging technologies. Alongside that, what you then get is the wholesale redefining of family. So if anybody can access the possibility of having children, it's no longer a situation whereby it's totally procreational, that a man and woman will join in marriage to have children, but rather people can have children when they want or not. Two men can have a child by way of surrogacy. That was also in the 1990 and 2008 legislation. Women, you can have donor sperm. When all of these things become possible, what it means is that it actually redefines family. So this is what we have to understand, that the redefining of family comes from a multiplicity of things. It's about every truth line in God's creation ordinance. That's the Colossians 1. All truth holds together. All structure of truth holds together in Christ Jesus, in his truth. Once you take away the lifeline, but you can then make life in the way that you want it when it's convenient, or remove life when it's inconvenient, what that means is that two men can have children, two women can have children in whatever way possible now, by surrogacy, by IVF and so on. They can foster children, they can adopt children, and the laws shift to reflect that. When I was studying in the 1980s, marriage was between a man and a woman, and you would have children within that construct. Today, protected in law as the family unit is a man and a man, a woman and a woman, a man and a woman, civilly partnered or married, and having children either naturally or by way of artificial methods, or by fostering or adoption. Every single one of those methods is recognized as equal within the law. What we also had during the coronavirus period was, the first thing that happened during the coronavirus period was that the abortion lobby was waiting, and they took the opportunity to say that pregnant women should not travel to clinics in order to have abortions. So now what we have, they shifted, and there was a massive constitutional battle. We ran a case on this. But without recourse to Parliament, the government permitted the clinics to send pills by post to have abortions at home. So what happens is women who are in an unplanned pregnancy will receive 2 pills through the post and self-abort at home without maybe see a doctor on the telephone, or hear a doctor on the telephone, or not even a doctor, usually just a clinician, not a doctor. So that's what happened. The opportunity was taken as we hit the coronavirus period during emergency legislation to extend abortion so that women could just have pills by post at home. The most ironic thing in all of this is that doctors that are trying to help women reverse that decision are being disciplined for trying to help women to change the decision that they've made at home. And we've got a number of stories around that, Natalia and Kirsty and Sophie, and it would be great for you to go and listen or watch some of those on the Christian Concern website, and I'm sure that the link can be put in as I speak. At the same time, we now have a big push in this nation whilst trying to save everyone from dying, there's also a push to legalize assisted suicide. So there's a great irony in all of that. So we're doing everything that we can to save people because of the fear of death, and people are palpably in fear. We've put people in fear. And yet, Matt Hancock said, it's too dangerous for pregnant women to travel from their homes so they can be sent abortion pills to kill their babies at home on their own. They shouldn't travel because that's too dangerous for them. He also said, as an exception, if you want to go and kill yourself in Switzerland at Dignitas by way of assisted suicide, then that's an exception. You can travel. So you can't travel to go and visit an elderly parent in Switzerland. You can't travel to go and do a mission project in Switzerland. You can't travel for work in Switzerland. You can't travel to go skiing in Switzerland. But Matt Hancock says you can travel to commit suicide. That has to give you a window into where the morality of the government. But as I said, they do not know what they do not know. Matt Hancock, if he doesn't know King Jesus, then who does he have to speak of him and this truth? Only us. So the failure is the failure of the church to speak. The failure of the church to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable in our society, to contend. So as well as being the church to mend the net, as well as being the pregnancy crisis centres, we need to be the refuges for the elderly, the lost, the lonely. So we can't all do everything, but what's God putting on your heart? Have you got houses? Have you got buildings? Where in our Christian communities, how are we going to look after the elderly? How are we going to look after the infirm, those that need our care? We need to be the new hospitals. In an NHS which is bulging, and an NHS that is secularized, we need to set up alternative structures. I want to respect the NHS. I want to respect hospitals with lots of amazing work and all the people that work within them. But can we think differently? What about we need to take care of all of our children, and we need to take care of we need to take care of one another and extend to the community. Redefining family, I've spoken already. So with the pill came then the rise of cohabitation, the removal of laws around marriage, 1973, the concept of irretrievable breakdown, a huge rise in pornography. And one of the most shocking statistics is so you get a highly sexualized culture. A culture says that with the pill, with sexual freedom, we are free. 1960s, a pop culture that reflects this. You sort of shift from, let's say, the Beatles, Bay City Rollers, Black Sabbath, Miley, I'm not going to. There are lots of Cardi B. What is it that we are? What is it that we are feeding ourselves with? What is the pop culture? What is the culture selling us? What does it look like? But what does the church look like? What's our music like? But what's our sexualization like? What about pornography? What about the fact that it's secret? What about the fact that it's on our laptops? Statistics show that 30% of church leaders access porn on the internet once a month. 42% of Christian men say they have a porn addiction. That statistic seems high, but it was a poll done in Premier magazine. 75% of Christian men have said they view pornography in one poll on a monthly basis. These are very shocking statistics. The largest traffic going out of universities in the afternoon to porn sites. What is that doing to the hearts and the minds of our young people? You see, we need to be purifying the church, purifying our eyes. So another challenge. In a world where porn can be viewed right here in secret and wreck us, defile our bodies, what are we going to be doing to make sure that our little children, the average age at which young people are viewing porn is 9 years of age for young boys, 9 to 10 is the first time they see something. Can you imagine what that does to their brain? Imagine the addictive behaviors and patterns that grow. Imagine what we see all around us. You know, I think it's hard for our men. And it's wrecking for our women. It's a very sick thing. How does the church look different? How are we going to mend the broken net of porn addiction when it's so secret, when it's everywhere, when it's even in pop videos, soft porn? And that's accepted. So what are we going to do? That's the challenge. Youth leaders, you in youth work? Youth leaders, really important. I'm all for captivating the hearts and the minds. 4-year-old Andrea Williams, Andrea Minichiello she was. Captivate the hearts and minds. Captivate the hearts and minds. And then, you know, when human sexuality is wrecked and broken and we get too much and it gets wrecked and ruined because it's something very beautiful for marriage, then, and people get broken and hurt, well, is it no wonder that we get to Romans 1? We exchange men on men relations, women on women relations. We begin to question our very gender, whether we're male or female. Is there any surprise in this world of families any way you want to have them, of exposure to this culture? Is there any surprise? And that is why we need to really work on understanding that Jesus Christ and the transforming power of the gospel is the answer to our sexual brokenness. But we have a bill, we have a push right now, as you will know, in Parliament to ban so-called conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a term that's been put upon us by the LGBTQI activists. They're even now saying that prayer to help someone move away from their unwanted same-sex attraction is spiritual abuse. So increasingly what we're getting, the language that we're getting in the public airwaves is that to help someone move away from unwanted homosexual behavior is spiritual abuse. That is conversion therapy. If you pray with them, if it's heavy counseling, if you're trying to change something that somebody is, then you could be liable for an offence. And we know that councillors have been struck off. Leslie Pilkington, her licence was removed and prohibited. And Mike Davidson, he has helped hundreds of people move away from unwanted same-sex attraction. He himself did in order to save his marriage. We have a global network of people, of therapists, of counsellors who've had to go underground in many countries because they are being banned. But the more they go underground, the more people are finding them, because the more people are finding that homosexual lifestyles lead to brokenness and hurt. Indeed, lifestyles that hurt sexually, whether it's in pornography, whether it's in serial relationships, that there is need for rescue. So you know this church hospital, this church net I'm talking about? It's to say to people, you can be transformed, you can be changed, you can be free. God sets you free from all guilt and all sin. Isn't that an amazing promise? And the gospel is the power that has the power to do that. The blood of Jesus was shed so that people are free from, no abortion, no sexual behavior, nothing is out with the forgiveness of God. What a message of hope. In a society that is ravaged with confusion and secret guilt and addictions and closed doors and behavior that people hurt, that is such a hope. And that is the hope that you at CRC Bible School are studying. And you are studying that in order to implement it, to go and mend the broken nets. To mend the net, to catch the culture. Catch the culture wherever you are in your sphere. So do you see, my idea for the church is that what mission looks like is, it looks like the old-fashioned mission hospitals, where we're picking up the broken-hearted, literally the broken-hearted, the messed up, because the culture's messed them up. And we can't blame women for having abortions when the culture says that's a good and that's an answer. We can't blame our boys for watching pornography when everybody's doing it, when everyone says that's fine. We can't blame people for not understanding what gender is if we're telling children aged 4 at school that they can choose their gender. But then when they hurt and when they're broken, we, the church, have the answers, the rescue. Just look at some of the books that are in our schools. Asher's Mum and Tango Makes 3, King and Kings. Little children, 10-year-old Casey excluded from her primary school because she raised concerns. She didn't want to be part of gay pride in her school. Her mum got visited by the police and social services, threatened with having Casey taken away just because her child did not want to take part in pride. Another great video for you to watch. Go and look at it on our website. Similarly, Shea Amuba, who got a West End actress, said she didn't want to act in explicitly lesbian scenes. She was hounded out of her profession, got given death threats, and the theatre company has come against her for £350,000. Why? Because she dared to bring a case for being taken out of her contract by them, because she posted on her Facebook post 5 years before a post saying that marriage is good. They dug through her Facebook posts to find a post supporting marriage and asking if she stood by her views when she was meant to play a lesbian character, a character that she never understood to be lesbian. Felix Ngole, a social worker who was removed from his course at university because he posted on Facebook in support of marriage. We've won that case, but it took us about 5 years. A teacher suspended because she answered a student's question about what she thought marriage was. A magistrate removed from his position as a magistrate, a wonderful man with a lifetime of public service, for saying behind closed doors that children do best with a mother and father. Parents who dare to question transgender ideology in school, forced to remove their children, called transphobic, when 6-year-olds were coming into school, little boys were coming into school dressed as little girls, and their children were getting distressed. School governors removed from their positions. Pastoral assistants removed from their positions for sharing Facebook posts on some of the LGBT curriculum that's in schools. Doctors, Dr. Makareth, fired because he refused to say on a medical certificate that a biological man was a woman because she identified as a woman. These are our cases at the Christian Legal Centre. Just to say, at the Christian Legal Centre, we are open 24/7. We have about 1,000 case inquiries come in every year. Christian Concern, and I think you've seen the introductory video to that, we seek to lobby into Parliament around these laws. We've got about 25 staff. We have people looking at public policy, researching. We have lawyers. We have communications, a communications team that seeks to speak of Jesus Christ in public life, that seeks to be the prophet and the priest to the king. And then the place of Jesus Christ. Well, what was so wonderful is that your pastor, Pastor Tabo, what a hero, was at the forefront of saying the churches should be open. When the government closed us down at the beginning of the lockdown, he was one of 122, but you know, he's always there. He's passionate. He's powerful. He knows that the church needs to be inside out, like I've just described. He knows that we've got to take the church across the globe. He knows that we've got to be one church in many locations. He knows we've got to educate. He knows we've got to keep our children safe. He knows we've got to be the schools. He knows we've got to be the hospitals. He knows. And he knows that we've got to raise up a next generation of Christian leaders, of pastors to lead in these projects. You at CRC Bible School, are you the leaders? Will you support men like Pastor Tabo, a man with strength and with courage? He had the courage to judicially review the government's decision to close down the churches. And we kept from the very, you can follow that case again on our website, go and take a look at it. In the end, through a parallel claim in Scotland, a High Court judge said that it was the government had acted illegally in closing us down in the way that they did. So let me say, your freedom to meet is a freedom that's hard won. We were actually looking at being shut down. Imagine if the government continued to do this. What you're preaching on homosexuality, that's dangerous. You can't say that because that could be spiritual abuse. Can you see? If they say you can't open your churches because of COVID, it's not safe. You can't speak that about sexual morality because it could harm people. You can't speak on transgenderism because it could harm people. You can't speak on Islam because it could offend people. Of course, the best thing we saw through lockdown is that many churches were open. They were they were looking at church in a different way. There was drive-in church. People were being stampeded by the police, but they carried on in any event. People were meeting in secret. And what would be amazing, as I record with you today to speak to you, in this past week, we've seen an elderly street preacher come down from his 2 steps. He was handcuffed by the police behind his back, kneed to the ground, put into a police car. And he was there in a shirt and tie, kept in a cell overnight, because it was said that what he'd been preaching, he was preaching from Genesis 1, was insulting and offensive. And I just want to ask you on that. You know, lots of people say to us, why do you defend the street preachers? Look at the way they do evangelism. Well, they're out there preaching the word of God, and this man in his shirt and tie was handcuffed. I saw the bruise, put into a cell overnight. Would they do that for Extinction Rebellion? Would they do that for thousands on the street for Black Lives Matter? Would they do that at a Pride event? No. Do they do it to a 71-year-old preacher reading from Genesis, saying that you're made in the image of God, male and female? Yes. Do they treat him with no respect? Yes. Do they laugh at his religion? Yes. If you don't defend the street preacher, who comes next? Pastor Tabo from the pulpit? He's fiery. Here's some of his Facebook posts, some of his sermons. Well, they're coming after school chaplains. We've got a number of those cases at the Christian Legal Centre. Or do the churches say, well, you know, there's lots of things you can say, but don't preach on abortion, don't preach on human sexuality, don't preach on marriage, because our equality laws, our hate laws say that's phobic, it's transphobic, it's homophobic. That sort of language harms people. That's conversion therapy, that's outlawed. Back to Martin Luther. Where is the gospel under attack? Well, it's Genesis 1. The way that we were made, what we were made to do.
They're arresting the dear man. Look, they're arresting him. Come on, you're on camera. You're on camera. You're on camera. You're on camera. You're on For a man preaching about Christianity, look how he's ripping it. Look how he's ripping it.
And then in the midst of all of this, we've seen from the 1960s, society that's forgotten God. Prior to that in this country, even if people didn't know Jesus personally, there was a framework, a Christianized culture. So no one questioned that marriage was between a man and woman. It was right to honor a woman and to honor her purity. It was right to be a businessman and for your handshake to be your bond. But this is where we are, a world that is in some chaos. And what rises at this time is another religion, Islam, that understands itself full well, a rising population, 2.7 Muslims in the UK in 2011. And we're about to get the new census, so we may have a bigger idea. But in 1960, there were 105,000 Muslims. Now, in 2001, 106 million Muslims. The number one name for many years now, boy's name has been Muhammad. We see, interestingly, they'll take down the preacher, the 71-year-old preacher. Do you think they'll stop a radical imam? Do you think that, what do you think would happen if someone said something around Islam? Well, they would be taken out as well, because there are some things that can be tolerated on the streets and some things that can't be. We see Islamic money going into universities, schools, church buildings. We see Sharia councils operating within Islam. There's an estimated 85 Sharia councils. What that means that Sharia law is being implemented in local communities, Sharia zones, Qatari ownership. And your very own Victoria Wastenay here at CRC Church, she was someone who came alongside a Muslim colleague, and then she herself was targeted and ultimately lost her job as she'd done so incredibly well. And interestingly, you at CRC had also been in the centre where she had been working doing an incredible work. She is a heroine of faith. She believed that Jesus changed lives. Pastor Paul Song, again, he went into prison, and in the prisons and in the hospitals, the chaplaincies are being taken over by imams. And the imam in Brixton Prison didn't want Pastor Song's version of Christianity in it, and he got him banned from Brixton Prison. We are safe housing at any one time at the Christian Legal Centre converts from Islam. And we're safe schooling children who got into trouble at school. This is not children who got into trouble for saying they don't want to do gay pride. Can you believe that? Safe housing, safe schooling children and safe housing converts from Islam in this country. That's part of the work of Christian Concern in the Christian Legal Centre. Do go and look us up, because I've been giving you the state of the nation. I've been not telling you about our work. And also, because you're fantastic, from time to time on the Christian Legal Centre and Christian Concern website, there are jobs available. So do take a look. There may be skills that come up. Think about joining us. If one of those jobs comes up and you want to be part of our little gang, come and join us. But the point here is, can you imagine in this nation, we are safe schooling children and safe housing converts from Islam. We are. So CRC Bible School, put on your robes. This State of the Nation talk is about understanding the culture, contending in the culture, creating the culture, constructing the culture. Create, construct, bring beauty. Bring beauty from the ashes. Bring beauty from the brokenness. The gospel is what? It's the power to change. The gospel changes, transforms, forgives, gives life, gives beauty, never condemns. It creates, it constructs. No condemnation, construction, creation, beauty, life, wonder, all. The life that God can bring. We are God's dominion people. Our mandate is to live for him. Eternal life begins here. We are not to shrink the gospel. A shrunken gospel shrinks gospel ministry. It's the sanctification of vocation. Our belief is the gospelization of the whole of life. We're going to mobilize God's people to enlighten, to educate, to envision, to equip. We're going to be joined up. We're going to have long horizons. We're going to build the hospitals. We're going to build the care homes. We're going to build the schools. We're going to be better connected. We're going to build music. We're going to build plays. We're going to build purity. That's kingdom culture. That mends the nets. We're going to be at the interface with Parliament. We're going to be at the interface with society, be building vision and policy, voices and platforms, visibility and practice. Join us. CRC has already joined us. We're partnering with you now, but join us. Be part of who we are. Make sure you sign up to join so that you receive our information at the Christian Concern. Join alongside us, because it will really make a difference, because we are partnered with CRC. You know, I'm not meant to have favorites, am I? But I have to confess that this church is right up there for me. Absolutely right up there, like in Pastor Tabor and Karen and, my darling Victoria Wastenay, Pastor Nanette. I mean, these people are truly the best. The people that I've come here and filmed with, the best. I love this church. I love this Bible school initiative. Your kingdom creators, kingdom culture, put on the robes of King Jesus.
Doctora, muchas gracias por su enseñanza. Como lo oramos al principio de la transmisión, estábamos absolutamente convencidos que el Señor nos iba a hablar en esta hora, nos iba a empoderar, y así hemos quedado. Un gran desafío. Y desde el Centro Legal nuevamente les anunciamos la convocatoria de ayuno y oración los días 5, 6, 7 y el 8 nos vemos. en las plataformas, escuchando lo que Dios tiene para nosotros. Adelante, Edgar, con las preguntas.
Doctora Luz Marina, muchísimas gracias. Andrea, good morning. Good morning for us. Good afternoon for you.
Wonderful to be with you. So
Gracias.
pleased to be with you again.
Yes. Andrea, we have now Carolina Buritica. She's a doctor, she's a nutritionist, and many other things that she's with us. I would like to, nos quieren mostrar la diapositiva porque tenemos esta mañana con nosotros a Carolina Buritica también, que va a hacernos los servicios de traducción para la doctora Luz Marina en este breve tiempito que tenemos para las preguntas y respuestas. Bueno, parece que no está listo, pero Carolina, gracias por estar con nosotros.
Good morning, Dr. Williams. It's a pleasure to be here to serve you and support the team. Good morning, buenos días a Edgar, Luz Marina y a todos los que nos están viendo.
Gracias. La doctora Andrea tuvo la oportunidad de mirar las preguntas. Caro, estamos contigo y con ella y aquí juntos todos. Dear Andrea, did you have the chance to read the questions or do you want me to tell them in order?
I think we should go in order. I saw the questions. I think that they were in Spanish.
Okay.
Maybe I missed the translation.
Yes, we had it in
English. They were in Spanish, so
it's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's
So perhaps, so let's yeah.
Si quieres, tú vas a
Bueno,
decir la
en esta
pregunta.
mañana,
Let's go from the top. Let's go.
Bueno, quieren que la lea yo, está muy bien. Vamos con la primera pregunta. Gracias a todos que han participado y nos las han dejado. Let's go with the first question. You can find it in the box, Dr. Andrea. The number 1. ¿Qué herramientas debemos tener los abogados para seguir el modelo de Esther y, como tú dices, vestir la túnica real?
Ahí traduzco, ¿no?
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Williams, what tools should lawyers have to follow Esther's model and wear the royal robe?
Well, the first tool is to actually show up, to be intentional.
La primera herramienta que es importante es darse a conocer y ser intencional.
Many lawyers believe that their job is essentially to apply the law.
Básicamente, el principal llamado de un abogado es mostrar la ley, dar a conocer la ley.
But what happens when the law begins to go very bad and the law begins to punish what is good and punish and uphold sin and punish those that speak against it? What happens then?
Pero ¿qué pasa cuando las cosas se cambian en el sentido de que la ley se supone que debe castigar las cosas malas, pero lo que está pasando es que se está castigando el bien, se está castigando el estar haciendo bien? Entonces, ¿qué pasa cuando eso se empieza a dar?
It is the lawyer's job at that point to contend within the system, so long as the lawyer can, to seek justice, to expose the injustice and to seek the justice. That is the job, and that is what we must do.
Entonces, en ese punto, cuando se empieza a ver este tipo de fenómenos, lo importante y el verdadero sentido de un abogado, su misión en este punto, es definitivamente defender la justicia, hacer cumplir la ley y castigar eso que está pasando.
The great benefit that lawyers have is to understand legislation as it comes through and understand where it will lead.
La gran ventaja que tienen los abogados es que tienen la capacidad de entender el sentido de la ley, cómo poder guiar las cosas bajo esos parámetros, bajo esa ley y poder hacerla cumplir.
And what the presentation I have just given does is demonstrate to all of you in Colombia and in Latin America where your laws will go if you follow the way of the West, where your laws will go unless you see ahead and resist.
Y el objetivo que tenía esta presentación o lo que yo buscaba con esta presentación es que ustedes como abogados se den cuenta de hacia dónde van las cosas, digamos, las leyes que se están presentando o cómo se está llevando este fenómeno a cabo, sobre todo en el occidente, en nuestro hemisferio, en nuestra parte. Y la misión de ustedes es como tal estar, digamos, muy abiertos a eso, muy atentos a eso y hacer que las cosas se cumplan.
Lawmakers, the government will say, and culture itself will say, we need these new laws because they are progressive, they are about equality, they are about tolerance, they are about anti-discrimination, anti-hate. They are pro-women.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Los que hacen, los que crean las leyes, los gobiernos y muchos movimientos y los digamos, los abogados se están encargando en todo lo que estamos viendo de empezar a crear nuevas leyes que apoyen todos estos movimientos que se están levantando, movimientos progresistas, movimientos pro aborto, contra la vida, todos este tipo de nuevas filosofías. Lo que está pasando es que los abogados están diciendo necesitamos nuevas leyes que apoyen este tipo de filosofías o de nuevos movimientos.
And so it is vital for Christian lawyers to stand to stand strong and to speak out when laws come against God's purposes, and the job of the church to support the lawyers to do that.
Entonces, la real misión que tienen los abogados cristianos en este momento es despertarse, levantarse y ponerse firme a defender las leyes que están basadas en los principios de Dios. Y las iglesias como tal están en la necesidad de apoyar a estos abogados que se levantan en pro de la verdad.
And this is why I'm so excited that Luz Marina Castrillon is pioneering the Christian Legal Center, the Centro Legal in Colombia. So excited about that initiative.
La doctora Williams está supremamente emocionada con el movimiento que Luz Marina ha levantado acá en Colombia en pro de defender la verdad y los principios bíblicos.
Perhaps we can move to question 2 now.
Yes, we just received a very important question, Andrea, and Caro is in the box there. Dice, ¿hubo regulaciones durante la pandemia para evitar que la iglesia se reuniera? Ahora nos están llegando nuevas regulaciones para que las reuniones de todo tipo a nivel social y comercial sean controladas mediante el pasaporte COVID. ¿Qué opinión te merece esto? ¿Qué debemos hacer?
So there were some new regulations and laws during the pandemic to avoid the church to get together. So now what's happening is we're getting new laws so that any type of meeting, gathering from all levels, social and commercially, are controlled with the COVID passport. So what are we called to do?
Well, we have a situation breaking here in the United Kingdom at the moment where to work in a care home, you have to be vaccinated.
I'm sorry, I need to translate.
Finish that, yes.
Hay una situación que se está presentando aquí en el Reino Unido y es que, did you mention care home?
Yeah, care home, yeah.
Que inclusive en las casas de...
For the elderly.
En los ancianatos, inclusive las personas están exigiendo que sean vacunadas.
So this means that 15% of the staff in the care homes will lose their jobs from next week because the government says that unless they are vaccinated, they cannot work in the care home.
Y lo
So
que
we
está
have a
pasando,
situation. Yeah.
oh, sorry, I'm sorry, but I need some time to.
No, it's fine.
Lo que está pasando, lo que esto representa es que el 15% de las personas que trabajan en estas instituciones, en estos ancianatos, van a perder sus empleos porque porque están exigiendo ser vacunadas o de lo contrario no pueden trabajar ahí.
Many of the workers have had COVID.
Muchos de los
So
empleados
they have the antibodies, and many of the workers object because of conscience reasons. So many of them are Christian and do not want to have a vaccine because of its association with fetal cells. But the main point here is that the government is forcing people, such workers, to have a vaccine, otherwise they lose their job. This is a very dangerous situation that is unfolding in the United Kingdom.
Esta es una situación supremamente peligrosa que se está desarrollando en el Reino Unido. Y lo que pasa es que la mayoría de estas personas que trabajan ya en estas instituciones han tenido COVID, entonces eso ya tienen los anticuerpos generados. Y por eso defienden su posición.
It's a medical apartheid. It's like a medical apartheid.
Okay. Entonces por eso están buscando no vacunarse, defendiendo sus principios que tienen alrededor de la vacuna. Entonces es un ataque, digamos, ya directo a todo el sistema médico.
Esto es grave. Andrea, parte de la pregunta decía, ¿qué debemos hacer? ¿Qué debemos hacer ahora? I will reread the question to see if you have more to say about it, the first question, or you can do that. There were regulations during the pandemic to prevent the church from meeting.
Okay.
Now we are getting regulations so that those meetings, meetings of all kind of at a social and commercial level, are controlled through the COVID passport. What should we do? Because now, yesterday in Colombia, we received a new regulation, yesterday or 2 days ago. And now we have to show our passport for all we will in a couple of days. We will show the passport. We will require to show it in order to be in the meetings.
Okay.
So what do you advise to do? What is the impression you have of it? Caro, gracias. Y como estábamos diciendo, hicimos la pregunta porque había una participante que no había contestado, hablándole a los hermanos que esta regulación que llegó a Colombia en la que nosotros tenemos que presentar nuestro pasaporte COVID para poder estar en eventos masivos y también se estará pidiendo para los niños de 10 en adelante.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think it's quite wrong, but if you're saying, I hope I have understood correctly because you were cutting out, if you're saying that the government requires a COVID passport for you to enter the church, that's an overreach of the state. That is a violation of the state's remit within law. And the church, for sure, will have a legal claim to stay open and to have its own safety rules in relation to that. It's a state violation of freedom.
No, I think that there's a misunderstanding. The regulation that was passed during these days is not about the church. It's about social and commercial levels. So you're not just talking about any gathering that's happening socially or commercially speaking. So that's where the COVID passport is required by.
Yes, and I suppose the question there is as well. So that is creating a dual system, and it's fettering freedom and freedom to move. Now, the argument will be made by the government that this is a proportionate interference with your freedom to move because safety matters. That's what the government will argue. Perhaps you can translate and then I'll continue.
Prácticamente lo que ella está diciendo es que esto es una violación de la libertad de la persona El argumento del gobierno va a ser que es una forma de proteger a los ciudadanos, pero realmente es una imposición en contra de los principios de la libertad del pueblo, de las personas.
Yes, I hope that I think and you've got the government has an argument in law that it's a proportionate and necessary interference. The question now is for you in Colombia and in Latin America, are the governments saying you cannot enter shopping malls, you cannot enter nightclubs, you cannot enter banks unless you have a passport? Is that what is being done?
Exactly, that's right.
Yes, so it's prohibiting freedom of movement, even if you have had COVID and can show that you have had COVID and you have antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so it's compelling people, in order to be free to move, it's compelling the citizens of Colombia to take a vaccine, which they may or may not want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an overreach of the government, because an individual should be able to choose how they want to look after their health. And obviously, we want individuals to care about their fellow citizens, but it's about a proportionate balance in all of that.
Sí, el punto de Andrea es que realmente lo que está pasando es que el gobierno está tomando una posición de, digamos que su punto es que nosotros debemos tener libertad como ciudadanos de escoger y de tener las elecciones en cuanto a si queremos o no tomar o vacunarnos en ese sentido. Y el gobierno lo que está haciendo es violar o bueno, en términos legales no sé cómo se maneje, pero está cortando la libertad de escogencia de los ciudadanos.
I think it will be very important for Colombians to resist this. It's very important for a mandatory vaccine in order to go out, in order just to live, in order to go to the supermarket. Is that what if that's what you're saying, then that's a complete shutting down of society and freedom, especially when even if you have had a vaccine, you do not stop the transmission of the disease.
Right.
Yes.
Lo que dice es que definitivamente están traspasando los límites de la libertad del ciudadano cuando se establecen este tipo de regulaciones en donde no se tiene la capacidad de decidir. Entonces ella dice que si ya se está llegando al punto donde para entrar a supermercados, para entrar a restaurantes, a sitios comerciales, el pueblo o digamos nosotros o los abogados tienen que pararse firmes y defender la posición y la libertad porque es una violación directa contra la libertad del ciudadano.
¿Cómo sería esa reacción? La gente aquí pregunta, ¿qué debemos hacer? Si ya es un decreto, ¿qué debemos hacer? ¿Qué recomendaría ella?
So people are wondering, okay, we now have the law and the government wants us to follow it. So what's your recommendation according to that?
Well, there needs to be a legal challenge. You need to bring together people. The church needs to stand. So you need to get a number of pastors together. Are people free to go to church without the vaccine? Can I ask that question?
Que si estamos libres, ella pregunta que primero que si estamos libres para ir a las iglesias sin la vacuna.
Yes.
Yes. At the moment we are.
But not to the supermarket, not to the bank, not to school.
The law just started. It was a couple of days ago. No sé si la ley fue específica en qué tipo de establecimientos.
Sí,
no
claro que sí. Claro que sí, y va a entrar en funcionamiento en algunos días.
So it was specific for certain places that we can't go to unless we're vaccinated, and it's going to start to be implemented within a few days.
So the people that are affected, the business owners, the workers, need to bring a case to challenge this. Entonces, and if there is enough of a grassroots movement, then you need to write to the government, but also to take to the streets. What is to have a rally is to show that this is not something that can continue, that you need your freedom. So actually you need to show the government, you need to meet in the central square in Bogota, in Medellin, you need to go and be out there to show that you need your freedom to move.
A lo que ella nos está llamando es realmente a pararnos firmes y defender la libertad de movimiento de los ciudadanos. Entonces ella dice que hay que levantarse con las personas, con los comerciantes, con los dueños de las empresas, de los establecimientos, que hay que levantar la voz, unirnos todos y presentar un caso ante el gobierno en donde estemos defendiendo el derecho a la libertad.
Así es. Andrea, esa es la voz pues de Andrea Michaels, quien ha vivido circunstancias graves en Inglaterra. Nosotros ya tenemos que cerrar acá, pero por supuesto quiero ser muy enfático en lo que ella responde, y es: pastores, únanse, iglesia, únanse y declaren que no están de acuerdo si no están de acuerdo. El decreto es muy sutil y no dice iglesias, pero les quiero leer. Dice: las entidades territoriales deberán adicionar a los protocolos de bioseguridad la presentación obligatoria del carné de vacunación contra el COVID-19 o certificado digital, en el que se evidencie como mínimo el inicio del esquema de vacunación como requisito de ingreso a eventos presenciales de carácter público o privado, dígase reunión de iglesia o no, que impliquen asistencia masiva, bares y segundo, o sea, ya estamos nosotros en el 1 sin decir iglesia porque no lo van a mostrar así, y 2, bares, gastrobares, cines, discotecas, lugares de baile, conciertos, casinos, bingos, actividades de ocio como los escenarios deportivos, parques de diversiones temáticos, museos y ferias, etc. So ya resultaron, pues el consejo de Andrea Williams, gracias Carolina Buritica por tu traducción, el consejo de Andrea Williams es: no dejen que el gobierno traspase los límites de la libertad en razón de prevenir contagio cuando se sabe que también se sigue contagiando aún estando con la vacuna. Entonces, pues muchas cosas que meditar, un contexto muy difícil el que estamos viviendo en el mundo, pero la idea es unirse y mostrarse. No todos somos llamados a hacer ciertas cosas, pero en este momento los abogados del país, los abogados cristianos, pues tienen un llamado muy importante, porque no será la madre de familia la que en este caso deba pronunciarse, no será de pronto el pastor de iglesia que no tiene las herramientas para escribir un documento jurídico. Entonces este es un llamado a los hombres y mujeres de la ley en Colombia, como decía la doctora en la enseñanza, a tener esa bata de Esther y decir: para este momento he llegado. Entonces sea este un momento lindo para decir los abogados: estamos en sus manos, así de sencillo. Como en el 2016, la educación de nuestros niños estuvo en las manos de los educadores y de las familias, e hicimos lo propio y hemos estado presionando. Pero ahorita es tiempo de ustedes, hombres y mujeres de la ley en Colombia, para que se levanten y cuiden la libertad de nuestro pueblo. Gracias por este tiempo. Vamos a unos minutos de descanso y en 10 minuticos estamos juntos otra vez.
Y en cumplimiento de nuestros proyectos, hemos creado para Colombia el primer centro de conciliación y mediación para cristianos. Allí usted encontrará un selecto grupo de profesionales avalados por el Ministerio de Justicia y el Derecho, operadores de métodos alternativos de resolución de conflictos dispuestos a ayudarles, porque estamos convencidos que la paz social está en el corazón del Padre.
Queremos que seas parte de la Wilberforce Academy en español, con el objetivo de formar a la próxima generación de líderes cristianos en la vida pública. Está dirigido a líderes en todas las áreas del ejercicio público, abogados, políticos, líderes educativos y de organizaciones pro vida, familia, para líderes de iglesia y estudiantes con potencial de liderazgo en colegios y universidades.
Y en cumplimiento de nuestros proyectos, hemos creado para Colombia el primer centro de conciliación y mediación para cristianos. Allí usted encontrará un selecto grupo de profesionales avalados por el Ministerio de Justicia y el Derecho, operadores de métodos alternativos de resolución de conflictos dispuestos a ayudarles, porque estamos convencidos que la paz social está en el corazón del Padre.
Queremos que seas parte de la Wilberforce Academy en español, con el objetivo de formar a la próxima generación de líderes cristianos en la vida pública. Está dirigido a líderes en todas las áreas del ejercicio público, abogados, políticos, líderes educativos y de organizaciones pro vida, familia, para líderes de iglesia y estudiantes con potencial de liderazgo en colegios y universidades. Hola, bienvenidos a la tercera sesión del segundo seminario introductorio de la Academia Wilberforce en español. Tercera sesión. Comenzamos hablando de la soberanía de Dios. La soberanía de Dios por encima hasta del Estado y de cualquier institución pasajera, veíamos anoche. Y la necesidad que esas instituciones pasajeras tienen de rendir cuentas al Rey de Reyes. Suena como un sueño, suena como un cuento eso, pero Dios tiene sus ejecutivos y sus ejecutivos somos nosotros, su iglesia. Pasamos entonces con el estado de la nación y Andrea Williams nos dice, las cosas están graves, tenemos que ponernos firmes, ir adelante y de manera deliberada establecer una voz. Establecer una voz, no hacer un gritico, pero establecer una estrategia, una sola iglesia y cada uno en lo suyo. Y ahora tenemos una tercera sesión maravillosa donde vamos a estar recordando pues para qué es que nos puso Dios, ¿verdad? Y para presentarnos, para introducir esta sesión, tenemos con nosotros a Marlene Castro. Marlene es una misionera, es madre de familia, es diseñadora gráfica, es una mujer que trabaja junto con su esposo en todo lo que tiene que ver con audiovisuales, cortometrajes y todo el medio de la comunicación con el objetivo de extender el reino. Ella es la fundadora de la Escuela de Para Padres, que es una comunidad para capacitar a los padres cristianos de hoy en temas relevantes de hoy para los niños que les tocó criar hoy, que no son los mismos de hace 10 años, son diferentes. Entonces, lo que el docente aprendió en la universidad fue útil, pero ahorita tiene otra generación. Es diferente la generación de preescolar a la que está en escuela media y a la que está en escuela alta. Qué importante eso. Y el pastor también debe renovarse porque tiene al frente generaciones de todas. Marlene, qué bendición tenerte con nosotros. Te has aceptado estar aquí y que seas una de estos que está atrás, haciendo que todo lo que se muestre, todo lo que se hace para la gente desde Christian Concern Colombia sea bello y muestre al Señor en cada texto, en cada gráfico. Gracias a ti por estar con nosotros. Marlene, bienvenida.
Muchas gracias Edgar, gracias por esa presentación, gracias a todos los que han atendido a este llamado de la Academia Wilberforce y de Christian Concern Colombia. Para mí también es un honor presentar este tema, que es el tema que nos va a presentar el doctor Dan Strange, que se llama El mandato cultural y la gran comisión. Yo creo que como iglesia nosotros tenemos que revisarnos un poco, lo decía ahorita Edgar, tenemos que revisar cuáles son los desafíos con los que nos hemos enfrentado en este tiempo. Ahorita en la mañana Andrea nos hablaba acerca de lo decisivo que hizo Esther en su tiempo, históricamente para su pueblo. Y nosotros como cristianos también tenemos que revisarnos para qué Dios nos ha establecido en este tiempo y como iglesia, cuál es ese mandato que nosotros tenemos. Algo que es muy importante entender es, o sea, en realidad son dos cosas diferentes, el mandato cultural y la gran comisión. Como iglesia solamente estamos aquí puestos para evangelizar y llevar personas al cielo, o de verdad como iglesia tenemos otra misión que es establecer el reino de Dios aquí en la tierra. Antes de dar la presentación de nuestro conferencista ponente que nos va a hablar de este tema, quiero también volverles a recomendar este libro que es Cultura centrada en el Evangelio. Fue escrito por el doctor Joseph Booth, que ya lo escuchamos en la noche de ayer, hablándonos acerca de la soberanía de Dios, pero en este libro de Cultura centrada en el Evangelio nos habla también acerca de ese mandato cultural que nosotros tenemos como iglesia. Los que todavía no lo tienen, los recomiendo de verdad que a través de Christian Concern y de la Academia Wilberforce puedan tenerlo, puedan leerlo y puedan complementar mucho más este tema del cual nos va a hablar entonces ahorita el doctor Dan. El doctor Dan Strange, él es de Inglaterra. Él es el director de Crosslands Forum y también es el miembro de la facultad de la Wilberforce Academy en Inglaterra. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, vamos a darle entonces el paso a él para que nos hable acerca de este tema del mandato cultural y de la Gran Comisión. Y vayan preparando sus preguntas en el chat, vayan copiando ahí todo lo que se les ocurra para que al finalizar la conferencia también podamos entonces hacerle las preguntas directamente a él. Bienvenidos y adelante entonces la conferencia del Dr. Dan.
Well, it's great to be with you. Always great to be with you at Wilberforce. And just to reiterate what's already been said, that there's a great revolutionary spirit that's going on this week. So much so that when I tried to get on the Wi-Fi in my room, one of the connection options was a CIA surveillance van that I could have looked into. So obviously we're being watched by someone. Sometimes in life, what's presented as an either or is actually a both and. And in this session, I want to suggest something that I think is a both and, that from our evangelical background has often been presented as an either or. And my own kind of personal experience testifies to this. And what we're going to be looking at is, what is the relationship between the call for people to become Christians, for evangelism, to say that people need to come to Jesus Christ or they're going to spend an eternity without God in hell. What is the relationship between that and our priorities, and the need for Christians to think Christianly, for society to be transformed now for Christ? What is the relationship between those two things? Because I think in our evangelical background in the UK, it's often presented as an either or. You either do evangelism or you do all this culture stuff. You can't do both. And for me, that is a no-brainer. It's always been a both and. My PhD at Bristol University was on what happens to people who never hear the gospel. My dad comes from Guyana in South America originally. He comes from a Hindu background. That's what got me thinking about other religions. I've written published articles and chapters on the doctrine of hell. I believe in evangelism. People need to be converted. And yet I'm also completely committed to everything that Joe has said just now, to what Christian Concern is about, to what the Wilberforce Academy is about, for the cultural transformation of our society for Christ. And those two things go together. But how? That's the question. And I reckon some of you are coming from churches where maybe one of those things has been stressed, maybe to the detriment of the other. Maybe you come from a background where they think, why would you want to get involved in all this cultural stuff? It's just about preaching the gospel to call people to Christ. Others will be thinking, no, we're so socially involved that maybe we've forgotten the need to call people to Christ at the same time. So this is a kind of an orientation session, building on everything that Joe said already. I don't usually work in PowerPoint, I work in handouts. So you've got a handout, you can take that with you. All the quotations are there. A very brief history of this dilemma, I suppose, over the last 100 or so years, within the UK, I suppose, but within Western culture in general. We know, don't we, because the Wilberforce Academy is not a random name, Wilberforce was a person. The era of social involvement in the 19th and early 20th century. Evangelical Christians, Bible-believing Christians, were significantly involved in social action. Wilberforce, Shaftesbury, incredible figures who did amazing things to change the shape of the nation. But then what happens in what the historian David Moberg calls the Great Reversal is that between 1910 and the 1930s, evangelicals became less concerned with social issues, and often that was a reaction to something called the social gospel. Some more liberal theologians were saying, well, we don't really need to believe about the trustworthiness of the Bible or in things like penal substitution or other kinds of doctrines. And so as a reaction to that, evangelicals said, well, we need to kind of come away from that social gospel. But that meant they became much more insular, and a great reversal occurred. And then in the 1960s and 1970s, there's what could be called the reversal of the great reversal. What's known as the recovery of the evangelical social conscience, typified by these very famous conferences in Lausanne and Manila, where someone like John Stott, formerly the rector of All Souls Langham Place, was very involved. And he talks about the importance of evangelism and social action kind of operating together, two blades of a scissor or two wings of a bird. And that's had so much discussion, so much so that there are many evangelicals today who would talk about the reversal of the great reversal. Did Stott capitulate too much to the social agenda? Did he need to stress more the need for evangelism? So it's a complicated picture. If you want more of the history, Tim Chester's book, Awaking to a World in Need, is very helpful there. Now, what I want to do, first of all, is to describe I hope not in a generalized way, in a way fit for teaching. I hope I'm not caricaturing or stereotyping, but I want to give you two visions, I suppose, that I see amongst our evangelical churches regarding this whole issue of evangelism versus social action, or the cultural mandate and the Great Commission. We'll come on to those terms shortly. And maybe you can recognize this in your own church background or your own church tribe. And I'm going to paint them negatively because I do think there's two ways of being in the world that are less than helpful. And the first is what I call a diluted Jesus. A diluted Jesus. Now here, the cry is for social justice. And the goal is nothing less than societal transformation. And the focus is what could be called bridging activities. Now, this is a sociological term by a guy called Robert Putnam, who wrote a big book called Bowling Alone. It was the phenomena in America of people who went bowling, tenpin bowling, by themselves. It's called Bowling Alone. And he talks about churches who do bridging activities. That is, how does the church bridge out into society? And for this diluted Jesus view, that's very important. And here, when you hear a sermon in these diluted Jesus churches that talk about the Good Samaritan, you hear about the Good Samaritan. Now, that's half of a punchline. I'll come on to the other half shortly. Here, the stress can be on the appeal of the gospel. And the stress often here is on the temporal, maybe to the detriment of the eternal. And so Jesus is proclaimed, but it's done in a kind of can be a diluted way. Now, there's some problems with this view. The first is what I'm going to call a human problem. It forgets something that Joe has already teed up for us in the last session, that really there are only two types of humanity. Colossians 2 says this very well. Therefore, as you received Christ the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. Friends, and you'll be hearing this constantly throughout the week. Yes, we believe in God's common grace. We believe that God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. We believe that all human beings are made in God's image. And yet at the end of the day, spiritually speaking, there are only two types of people. There are those who are rooted in Christ Jesus and those not according to Christ. You are either a Christian or you are taken captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world. And my worry in this diluted Jesus picture is that we kind of water down that difference. We say that basically people are good and people are all in the same boat. But it forgets that there's a fundamental distinction in humanity which call for two radical ways of viewing the world, two worldviews. That's what Joe was talking about. The other problem with this diluted Jesus view is that it accepts this idea, and Joe's already spoken about it, between as if there was kind of we are people of faith and everyone else is kind of no faith, or they're neutral. And the Bible just does not paint it like that. Chris Watkin, who is, I think, going to be one of the most important thinkers for us as we in the next few years. He teaches French philosophy in Monash University in Melbourne. He's a Brit, comes from Cambridge. He's written some brilliant books, Thinking Through Creation. He's got another book coming out. But he says this, look, if Christians do not articulate how the Bible explains all other stories in terms of its own story and how it provides a positive vision for society, then other stories will step in and explain the Bible in their own terms and provide that vision in its place. There is no neutrality here. And the problem sometimes with a diluted Jesus view is it forgets those spiritual realities. It forgets that it's either the worship of the living triune God or it's the worship of idols. And that's not politically correct. It's not particularly a tolerant way of seeing things, but that's the way the Bible describes human beings. Next, with this diluted Jesus view, there's a cultural problem. One writer, Henry Van Til, summarizes it by saying that culture is religion externalized. And at the end of the day, and this is where my pietism kicks in, I'm happy to say that, people need to be converted. Their roots need to be dug up by the Spirit through the proclamation of the gospel. There needs to be heart change. Evangelism, the calling of people to Christ, turning from their sin and coming to him, remains ultimate, radical. The word radical here meaning the real sense of the word radical from the root, the radix. It's essential. And this is where I think typifies sometimes this kind of, is it evangelism or is it social transformation? Do we have to choose? You don't have to choose, and we see it very clearly here in a quotation from the guy from whose this week is named after, William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce, of course, you will know, was instrumental in the banning of the slave trade, but he was also a best-selling author. And he wrote this great book that was, I suppose, went through many editions. It has one of those great 18th century titles, A Practical View of the Prevailing Religious System of Professed Christians in the Higher and Middle Classes in this country, contrasted with real Christianity. The guy needed a marketing department, obviously. But those books have like the titles go over the whole page. Anyway, this is what Wilberforce says in 1797. He talks about the fatal habit of considering Christian morals as distinct from Christian doctrines insensibly gain strength. Thus, the peculiar doctrines of Christianity went more and more out of sight, and as might naturally have been expected, the moral system also began to wither and decay, being robbed of that which should have supplied it with life and nutriment. Here's what Wilberforce is saying. Even in 1797, there are people who want Christian morality. They want the fruit of the Christian worldview. They want understandings of human dignity and equality and the idea of fairness and peace and all of those things, the sanctity of life. They want all that stuff. What they don't want is what Wilberforce says are the peculiar doctrines of Christianity. Beliefs about the inerrancy of the Bible, or the cross of Christ, or belief in the resurrection. What people want, they want the morals, they want the fruit, they don't want the root. In 1797, Wilberforce is saying that. Now, I know that the tide in some ways is going out, even more so, 300 years on, or however long it's been. But even today, in our Western culture, so shaped by Christianity, which I'm sure Tim was going to talk about this afternoon, I still think a lot of people want, or they know, or there's some way they want the Christian fruit. They don't want the root. And Wilberforce says, you cannot have it both. As soon as you start losing the peculiar doctrines of Christianity, Jesus Christ is Lord. He is the Son of God. He is God incarnate. He died on the cross for our sins. He rose again. The basic orthodox truths of Christianity, as soon as you lose those, then you will eventually lose the fruit. And I think that's what we're seeing all over the place. But we need to keep on affirming those. We need to affirm who Jesus is, and that people need to come to him in their sin and they will receive eternal life. So Wilberforce doesn't seem to have had a problem with proclaiming the gospel and doing amazing social reform. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Finally, with this diluted Jesus view, there's what I'm going to call a Jesus problem. It may change, but I still think you can believe in Jesus in our culture, it's fine. But where is Jesus placed? Here's what Francis Schaeffer said in that classic book, How Shall We Then Live? This was the main issue between Rome and the Christians. Who is Lord? Francis Schaeffer pointed out, let us not forget why the Christians were killed. They were not killed because they worshipped Jesus. Nobody cared who worshipped whom, so long as the worshipper did not disrupt the unity of the state, centered in the formal worship of Caesar. The reason the Christians were killed was because they were rebels. They worshipped Jesus as God, and they worshipped the infinite personal God only. The Caesars would not tolerate this worshipping of the one God only. It was counted as treason. People are going to be fine if you worship Jesus, as long as Jesus serves the greater goods, the greater values that we place. And that can be anything. There's all kinds of things that are vying for supremacy. And as long as you believe in Jesus who serves that end, you can have your Jesus. But when Jesus is at the top and he starts calling the shots, then that's when the nation state gets worried. To our shame, that's why our government is far more worried about militant Islam than it is about Christianity. Because they're far more, in some ways, consistent in terms of what this means for a world and life view. If Jesus is to be preeminent, Jesus cannot be diluted. He is Lord. That's what Lord means. Now, I've hammered this view called a diluted Jesus view. You may come from that background. Now I'm going to hammer the other side for equality purposes. I'm going to call this, and in some ways I come from this background more, what you might call a delimited Jesus. Here, the cry is justification by faith alone. Not so much interested in social transformation, interested in talking about the gospel and the need for conversion and the doctrine of justification. Here, the goal is not on societal transformation, the goal is personal transformation. Here, the focus is not so much those bridging activities from the church out into the community, but what Putnam calls bonding activities. It's about coming together as a church and doing things for ourselves as Christians. Here, when you hear the Good Samaritan preached, people who come from this delimited view, well, they'll talk about the Good Samaritan, but they want to talk about the perfect Samaritan, Jesus. The Good Samaritan is not a story about being engaged in society. It's about seeing Jesus as the great Samaritan. Here, maybe the focus is more on the offense of the gospel than the appeal of the gospel. And maybe the stress is on the eternal to the detriment of the temporal. Now, in some ways, I've come out of that kind of view, where almost evangelism is everything. And what we're involved in this week is a distraction. Why aren't we just going out and just talking about Jesus and just calling people to conversion? Why are we bothered about talking about Christian stir-fries and all of that nonsense? But here are the dangers of this view. And the first, and I mean this now in a more derogatory sense, is that of pietism. Melvin Tinker, who will be speaking tomorrow, muses in an illustration. Listen to this. One well-known evangelical Bible teacher from Britain was travelling with a white church minister in South Africa along a coastal road after apartheid had ended. On coming to a particularly attractive stretch of beach, the South African pointed to it and said approvingly, "That used to be a whites-only beach. Now it is open to all." The response of his English visitor was simply to shrug his shoulders and say, "That doesn't matter one way or another. It's not a gospel issue." What he meant, of course, was that whether people could or not use that beach because of the colour of their skin did not have any direct bearing on their eternal destiny that was to be determined by their response to the gospel message. However, from another viewpoint, he was profoundly mistaken. It was a gospel issue, for not only did such restrictions constitute a barrier to black people in particular from hearing the gospel, especially from whites who introduced such discriminatory laws, but it denied a fundamental tenet of the gospel, namely, in Christ there is neither male nor Jew, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. Here is a failure to recognize that the gospel has certain entailments which need to be worked through, which go beyond private morality. And this delimited Jesus view says, well, Jesus is Lord in a particular sphere of life, but really the rest of the stuff that goes on in the world, that's not where Jesus is Lord. It's kind of, we don't really think about that much. Tim Keller notes, the gospel is the way that anything is renewed and transformed by Christ, whether a heart, a relationship, a church, or a community. It's the key to all doctrine and our view of our lives in this world. Therefore, our problems come from the lack of orientation to the gospel. Put positively, the gospel transforms our hearts and thinking and approaches to absolutely everything. And again, you're going to have this hammered into you this week to think Christianly about everything. It's not simply about me being a Christian on a Sunday in the Sunday gathering or Wednesday at the Bible study, or when I do something, I'm going to, at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock every Thursday, I do evangelism. It's about our hearts being changed by the Lord Jesus Christ in everything that we do and everything that we think about and everything that we organize. Pietism in that sense is very unhelpful and very ungodly. Then there's a human problem. Joe's already pointed out that this, again, this delimited Jesus view forgets or sometimes denigrates the doctrine of creation or the importance of the human body, or it has a kind of a spiritual material split that the Bible does not make. We are created whole beings, body and soul, what theologians call a psychosomatic unity. Abstract, disembodied, and historyless sinners do not exist. Only very concrete sinners exist, whose sinful life is determined and characterized by all sorts of cultural and historical factors, by poverty, hunger, superstition, traditions, chronic illness, tribal morality, and thousands of other things. I must bring the gospel of God's grace in Jesus Christ to the whole man and woman in his or her concrete existence in their everyday environment. We believe, don't we? And Joe's already said it in terms of not just believing in heaven, but believing in the new heaven and earth. But we believe in a resurrected Saviour. The resurrection means that this world matters, that the body matters. Unlike many other worldviews, where the whole idea is that you want to get out of this evil sarx, this evil flesh, and escape. That's why Christianity is so good news, such good news for this world now, because matter matters. Then with this delimited view, there's a cultural problem. And I think there's a naivety here. It's funny, sometimes you hear people who are so stressed, the kind of, we must only do proclamation in a very narrow way, we must do evangelism and it's all going to burn and all of this stuff. But then these are the people who bemoan when the world's going pear-shaped. We bemoan the situation, but we've evacuated the area time and time again. And this isn't simply, there's a sociological factor. Some of you will know about this, the whole idea of plausibility structures, about the way that we hold beliefs. A plausibility structure is a web of beliefs that are so embedded in the hearts and minds of the bulk of a society that people hold them either unconsciously or so firmly that they never think to ask if they're true. In short, a plausibility structure is the worldview of a society, the heart of a community. One of the main functions of a plausibility structure is to provide the background of beliefs that make arguments easy or hard to accept. Now, you might think, oh, sociology, why do you want to bother with that? I just want to open my Bible and talk about Jesus. But the problem is we're not speaking into a vacuum. Our culture is deeply suspicious of Christianity in that sense. It's deeply implausible. That's why some people who you know will have already rejected Jesus or won't be able to hear what you're saying. And it's not as if they've done a PhD on atheism. They probably may have watched a few Channel 5 documentaries on something and it's told them. But there's a deeply implausible structure, which is the air that we breathe. And we need to deal with that. How do we kind of deal with those issues that people have to be able to say something about Jesus? And I do believe that our apologetics, our evangelism can be more or less effective. Not because I don't believe that anyone who is ever converted is not converted by the Spirit. It's only the Spirit that can take a dead heart and make it alive. I'm absolutely convinced. It's nothing to do with me or the proclamation. It's to do with the Spirit's work, yes? But at the same time, the Spirit's works through means. And the example I always give, well, I saw it at King's Cross yesterday. But when I support West Ham United, and when I go and watch West Ham United play, 50,000, 60,000 people going towards the stadium. There's a guy there, a brother, I imagine, who's got his megaphone and he's shouting out Christian verses for people to be converted. Do I think that God could convert some people through him shouting Bible verses out of his megaphone? Of course. Do I think that's the most effective way to reach people in 2021 for the gospel? No. Does that make me humanistic or kind of not relying on the Spirit? No. All of these things are so important in terms of how we engage with the culture, that we understand the culture that we're in, so we can contextualize the gospel accordingly. And again, this is where we're naive. And we're going to, I'm sure that Tim and others will be talking about it. Laws do not save people, but they do shape people. And where we have a society where laws are increasingly shaped by non-Christian values, that is going to affect the plausibility of the gospel. It is going to affect how we speak about Christ and the ease of speaking about Christ. And then finally, with this delimited Jesus problem, we go back to the question again of who is Jesus? Jesus is not Lord of just a narrow sphere. He is the one to whom all authority has been given by the Father. Jesus Christ has the right to be Lord of all. And Christians have a duty to challenge areas where this rule is not respected. And accounts of anything in creation that do not relate that something to Christ are necessarily incomplete and to that extent misleading. And a key area of that is our thoughts and ideologies. We're to take every thought captive for Christ. Okay, we've had these verses already, haven't we? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. So I'm going to say no to a diluted Jesus, and I'm going to say no to a delimited Jesus, and I'm going to say yes to a Jesus who is Lord, and for people to turn to him in repentance and faith and then apply that lordship to the whole of their lives in everything that they do, and that is how society will be changed by the Spirit. Unfortunately, in our context, it does seem to be an either-or. And some of you will come from church traditions that maybe has stressed one over the other, and it doesn't have to be like that. And the Wilberforce Academy is so great because it does not want to take away the need for proclamation and conversion, because we want to speak about Jesus in public life, not simply about being a better person, not just about Christian morality, but we want to talk about Jesus. Talking to Andrea and Andrew Marsh and others over the year, it seems very strange to me sometimes that some Christian parachurch agencies, Jesus seems to be the problem. He seems to be the embarrassment. Jesus is the solution. Not in a kind of superficial pietistic way, because Jesus is the one in whom all things fit together. Jesus Christ is the clue to all creation. So please don't think that you're shut up between two alternatives of a delimited Jesus or a diluted Jesus. Jesus is Lord. Now, the question becomes, I suppose, then theologically, how then do we fit these things together? Because at the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, God says to Adam and Eve, go and fill the earth and subdue it. It's what theologians call the cultural mandate. Tend and keep the garden. And what Jesus says to his disciples, Matthew 28:19, go and make disciples of all nations. And the question is, what's the relationship between what God says to Adam and Eve in the garden to fill and subdue the earth, and what Jesus says to his disciples to go and make disciples, the Great Commission? Are those two things against each other? Are they running separately in parallel to each other? Or, and I think this is the right answer, are they wonderfully kind of integrated together? And so for the last, I suppose, bit of my time, we're hopefully going to have some questions for 10 minutes on this. I just want to give you a very brief overview. Creation, full redemption, put in those kinds of terms, that just shows you how I think these things beautifully complement each other. It does not have to be an either or. So here we go. The first, rule. God creates humans in his image to rule over his creation under his lordship for his glory. We can look up some key text there if you want to. Human beings are culture builders. We reveal God. We're made in God's image. We relate to God. We're built to worship him. And we represent God. This is sometimes forgotten. In the ancient Near East, you put down an idol, an icon, and it staked out a claim for the god. If you put the idol down, it was saying this part of the land belongs to this god. We are made in God's image. We represent God. We are staking a claim for him in our very human beingness. So we are made to rule over creation. We have dominion, not domination, but dominion. The cultural mandate to fill and to rule, to tend and to keep the garden. We can develop. Eden is to be developed. There can be expansion, there can be diversity, but we still need to do it in a way that keeps to the master's blueprints. There's unity and there's diversity. We are to fill just as God has filled in Genesis 1, but we have a role to rule as well. And that is part of what it means to be human, to rule. And all we are talking about this week is what it means to rule in a godly way according to God's blueprint. That's what we were made to do. It hasn't been taken away from us when we become a Christian, because Genesis 1 is still there, fill and subdue. But we know that something's gone wrong, too, ruined. The fall reverses creation by replacing God with idols which rule us and destroy our relationship with God, with each other, and with the rest of creation. So something has gone wrong where we're meant to respond to God's or be under God's authority, even in our ruling. We now worship other things that tell us what to do and shape us. And this is where culture becomes so important. John Frame, one of my favorite theologians, says this. Listen to this. Culture is what a society has made of God's creation, together with its ideals of what it ought to make. Or maybe we should put the ideal first. People make things because they already have a plan in view, a purpose, a goal, an ideal. The ideal comes first, then making things. First the norm, then the cultivation, the culture. So now we can see how culture is related to religion. When we talk of values and ideals, we're talking religion. In the broad sense, a person's religion is what his or her heart most strongly, what motivates him or her most deeply. It's the value which transcends all other values. It's interesting that the Latin term cholera also refers to religious service and comes into English as cult, cultic, and so on. Culture and cult go together. If a society worships idols, false gods, that worship will govern the culture of that society. If a society worships the true God, that worship will deeply influence, even pervade its culture. If, like ours, a society is religiously divided, then it will reveal a mixture of religious influences. Now, please, go and talk to someone like Sam about this. There is no coincidence that the doctrine of Allah, who Allah is, has an amazing impact on how Muslims would want to organize themselves, because we become like the gods that we worship. In our context at the moment, because there is no one overarching Lord, it's a complete chaos because it's clashing gods all over the place. The public square is a kind of a battleground of the gods, and people choose their objects of worship. So we've been made to rule. Something has gone badly wrong. Now, the next two, others like Jonathan Burnside and others will be talking about this. Restrained. In the story of Noah, God shows his restraining power, his ultimate intention to redeem creation through the second Adam. God could have wiped out humanity, but he doesn't. He puts the rainbow, not to do with the NHS, not about any other type of way of living. The rainbow is God. Remember, the rainbow is not human beings looking at a rainbow and saying, oh, I'm so glad God's going to not send another flood. It actually says the rainbow reminds God not to send another flood. Not because God is going to forget because he's God, but it's a gift to us. When we see a rainbow, we're reminded that God has promised he's not going to send another cataclysmic flood, even though he could have done. What divine mercy. Just a little side point here. Please don't just thank God for the extraordinary things. The fact that season follows season and day follows night is a glorious gift of God. Given our sin, given what happened in those early chapters of Genesis. And we talk about God's common grace. He restrains sin. He holds us back from what we could be like. Friends, it could be far worse. But God in his goodness restrains sin. And sometimes, as we read in Romans 1, he does let cultures go. Maybe our culture is being let go by God at the moment. And that's one of the things we have to realize. And then role modeled. Israel is a pattern illustrating of what God's rule looks like in all areas of human life and culture. And here Jonathan will be talking about biblical law and what a great model the Old Testament and the Old Testament law is for how we should be living today. And then rescued. Jesus Christ is the second Adam, who in his role as prophet, priest, and king rules over everything. Christianity, says Herman Bavinck, creates no new cosmos, but rather makes the cosmos new. It restores what was corrupted by sin. It atones the guilty and cures what is sick. The wounded it heals. Jesus' work on the cross, the fact that the Father raised him from the dead, the fact that he is now ascended, the fact that he is Lord, is not simply about a personal individual transformation in becoming a Christian, right? It's not less than that. It's about cosmic renewal. And we sing it. Well, sometimes we don't sing it. In the carol, Joy to the World, Joy to the World, yeah? Here's the verse that we don't often sing. No more let sin and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow, far as the curse is found. We're going to hear this week about the curse has extended to every area of life, but Jesus has something to say about that in his life, death, and resurrection. As far as the curse is found, there is still the possibility of redemption and renewal and transformation. Not perfectly, but still the blessings of the Christian life now. Jesus is the heart of real culture. He came to rescue us and the world from ruin. His redemptive work in the gospel isn't just about saving individual souls from hell. It's cosmic in its scope. The in the beginning creation and the new creation brought about by Christ are intimately related. Grace restores and perfects nature. In tune with our central theme, Brian Matson puts it nicely when he notes that the best stories have endings that flow and resolve something that had potential from the beginning. In other words, if grace is our happily ever after, it flows from nature's once upon a time. Now, the reason I say that is because sometimes we act that the Christian life has got nothing to do with creation or nothing to do with the world as it was before. But redemption is about the restoration of grace being restored and the perfection of nature. And so, what does that mean for us? 6, restored. There's some other quotations you can read in your spare time. In the gospel, Christians are united to Jesus and are restored to their role as rulers over creation. As rulers over creation. As one writer puts it, and this brings it all together, I hope, the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19, go and make disciples of all nations. The Great Commission is the republication of the cultural mandate, fill and subdue the earth, now this writer calls about the semi-eschatological age. By that he means the fact that it's now and not yet. The kingdom is now, but the kingdom is still to come. Unlike the original cultural mandate, it presupposes the existence of sin and the accomplishment of redemption. It recognizes that if the world is to be filled with worshippers of God, subduing the earth as his vassal kings, they must first be converted to Christ through the preaching of the gospel. It's not an either or, it's a both and. The Great Commission is what the cultural mandate looks like after the resurrection. We must be clear that from the beginning, God called into existence and unto himself a spiritual body that would rule over all he had created, establishing his magisterial rights at every level of society. The centuries of revelation to follow have provided deeper and fuller explanation and application of God's first dictum, but have added nothing to its essential message. Once more, go therefore and make disciples of all nations is not in addition to fill the earth and subdue it, but is a final phase in the unveiling of what God meant when he said, fill the earth and subdue. Please, it is not evangelism or cultural engagement. It's evangelism and cultural engagement. It's cultural engagement that will naturally lead to evangelism. And so, we're going to have about 7 minutes of questions. Let me just finish here. The church. What is our role, not just as individual Christians, but as local churches? We gather together and then we scatter during the week. And there's lots of different kind of illustrations for this. The best I've heard is this. Your local church that you need to be plugged into and serving is like an army tent, a medical tent on the battlefield. And every week, everyone comes in and they've had a hard week at work. They've been trying to apply Jesus' lordship to everything. And you're tired, you're wounded, you need to be fed by the word, you need to be built up, bandaged up, to be pushed out again for the next week. The church is that army tent. It's an imagination station also. Here's Jamie Smith. Because worship ends with sending, Christian worship is less the rites of an enclave and more like the training ground for a sent people whose mission will take them into the contested space of markets and elections, corporations and council halls. The enacted narrative of Christian worship as the rehearsal of both our creation and recreation culminates in the go of both Genesis 1 and Matthew 28. Thus, the church is less a contrast society we retreat into than a recentering community of practice that we are sent from. That's so important for our churches that we realize that. We're not just a holy huddle and an enclave. Yes, we need to come together. Yes, we need to be together. We need to have Christian fellowship. But then the whole point is that we're sent out into the world. A challenge for you. From the Wilberforce Academy, are you going to challenge your church leadership about that? Are you going to say, look, I've been given this vocation. God has called me to be an engineer. God has called me to be a teacher. God has called me to be an IT designer. God has called me to be an artist. Please, as my pastor and my church leadership, are you going to support me in that so I can go out? And I need some theology to help me. I want you, the church, to be praying for me. So often I've heard of people who have ended up even coming to Oak Hill to study theology, or they've had a vocation doing something else, and their church leadership hasn't been that bothered about what they've been doing. As long as they've been going to the meetings and doing their evangelism, but what does it mean to apply a Christian worldview to their vocation? And you're going to start doing that this week, thinking about that. And I don't want you to go back in a kind of an arrogant, kind of swaggering way and say, oh, I went to the Wilberforce Academy and now I'm going to tell you how to do your job. But the reason I have stayed at Oak Hill training ministers for so long is because it was strategic, because I want to get to you guys. And the way to do that is through training pastors who know that they need to equip all of their members for works of service. And that means doing hard work, spending time understanding where they're coming from, what their issues are in their vocation. And that's what you're going to be doing this week. Okay, we've got a few minutes of questions. Let me just finish with an illustration, a little one, 1 minute. Don't think of your life as a pie chart, but as a flow chart. Don't think of your life as, well, I've got my vocation, I've got my church work, I've got my evangelism. Think of it as a flow chart where your heart has been changed by Jesus, and that's going to affect everything that you do. We're often compartmentalized, and we have to realize that organic change that happens when we become Christians, which will naturally lead to evangelistic conversations. Right, 6 minutes.
Tremendo esta secuencia, esta continuidad respecto al llamado del Señor en la vida de los creyentes. Qué importante este recuerdo que hace Dr. Strange hacia los pastores acerca de la importancia de que ellos preparen a sus ovejas para el ejercicio de sus ministerios en sus oficios, ¿verdad? Y me pareció preciosa la pregunta con la que él termina. ¿Cómo entonces aplicar una cosmovisión cristiana a una vocación? ¿Cómo aplicar una cosmovisión cristiana a una vocación? Precioso, precioso. Necesitamos brillar, hacer que el reino de Dios venga a través de nosotros, porque no es de transformar culturas, pero de vidas transformadas que transforman culturas. De Jesús en nosotros, caminando y haciendo cultura, haciendo reino. Muchas gracias. Nuestra sesión de preguntas y respuestas, vamos a trabajarla. Hay algunas preguntas y las vamos a hacer llegar al Dr. Strange y vamos a estar haciéndoselas a ustedes. También puedes llegar, valga la redundancia, a través de nuestro boletín quincenal. Ha sido precioso estar juntos, muchas cosas para meditar y seguir considerando. Entonces continuaremos en nuestra cuarta sesión esta noche con el doctor Pepe Farfán, transgenerismo y homosexualidad en Latinoamérica. ¿Qué tenemos que hacer? Nos vemos esta tarde, pues, unos minutos antes de las 7 de la noche, hora Colombia, empezaremos la transmisión.